Captain Sarah Mitchell stood at the edge of the flight line, watching the massive C-130 Hercules aircraft being prepped for takeoff. The four turboprop engines gleamed in the morning sun, and ground crews moved around the aircraft like busy ants. She had dreamed of flying this beast for years, but today she was being told to stay in the control tower instead. "Mitchell, you're needed in the tower today," Colonel Harrison had said during the morning briefing. His tone left no room for argument. "We have a new air traffic controller, and I want you to supervise. Make sure everything runs smoothly." Sarah bit back her frustration. She was one of the most experienced pilots on the base, with over 2,000 hours of flight time and certifications on multiple aircraft. Yet here she was, being relegated to tower duty while the men got to fly the missions. It wasn't the first time, and she suspected it wouldn't be the last. The control tower at Ramstein Air Base in Germany was a busy place. Aircraft came and went constantly, from small training planes to massive cargo haulers. Sarah climbed the stairs to the glass-enclosed control room, her boots echoing in the stairwell. She knew every inch of this place, having spent countless hours here during her training years ago. "Good morning, Captain," said Airman Johnson, the new controller. He looked nervous, constantly adjusting his headset and checking his instruments. "Thank you for being here today. I heard there's a big supply mission going out." Sarah nodded and settled into the supervisor's chair. Through the large windows, she could see the C-130 she had been watching earlier. The aircraft was designated Hercules 401, and it was scheduled to deliver medical supplies to a remote base in Afghanistan. The mission was important, but not particularly dangerous. It should have been a routine flight for any qualified pilot. "Hercules 401, this is Ramstein Tower." Johnson spoke into his microphone. "You are cleared for engine start." The four engines of the massive aircraft began to spin up, their distinctive whine filling the air. Sarah watched as the pilot, Major Rodriguez, ran through his pre-flight checks. She knew Rodriguez well. He was a decent pilot, but not exceptional. Certainly not more skilled than she was. "Tower, this is Hercules 401. Rodriguez's voice crackled through the radio. "Requesting taxi clearance to runway 08. Hercules 401, taxi to runway 08 via taxiway Alpha. Wind is 070 at 8 knots. Sarah monitored the exchange, but her mind wandered to her own flying experiences. She had first fallen in love with aviation as a child, watching planes take off from a small airport near her hometown in Ohio. Her father had been a mechanic there, and he often brought her to work on weekends. She would sit for hours, watching pilots maneuver their aircraft with precision and grace. When she turned 18, Sarah enlisted in the Air Force. She scored exceptionally high on all her aptitude tests and was selected for pilot training. The training was grueling, but she thrived under pressure. She graduated second in her class and earned her wings with pride. But even from the beginning, she faced challenges that her male counterparts didn't. Instructors questioned whether she had the physical strength to handle large aircraft. Fellow trainees made jokes about women in cockpits. Some suggested she would be better suited to flying transport planes rather than fighters, as if cargo hauling was somehow less demanding or important. Sarah proved them wrong at every turn. She demonstrated exceptional skill in both small trainers and large transport aircraft. Her flight instructors noted her smooth touch on the controls and her ability to remain calm under pressure. She earned certifications on multiple aircraft types and built an impressive safety record. "Hercules 401, you are cleared for takeoff," Johnson announced, bringing Sarah back to the present. The massive C-130 began its takeoff roll, gathering speed as it moved down the runway. Sarah watched it lift off smoothly and disappear into the morning sky. Another mission she could have flown, another opportunity denied. "Captain, I have a question about the approach procedures," Johnson said, pulling out a thick manual. "When aircraft are coming in from the east, what's the standard pattern?" Sarah spent the next hour reviewing procedures with the young airman. She enjoyed teaching, but it wasn't where her heart lay. Her passion was in the cockpit, feeling the response of the aircraft to her touch, navigating through weather and challenges, completing missions that mattered. Around noon, the radio crackled with an urgent transmission. "Ramstein Tower, this is Hercules 401. We have an emergency. Johnson nearly dropped his coffee cup. Hercules 401, state your emergency. Tower, we have a medical emergency aboard. Major Rodriguez has collapsed. The co-pilot he's not responding well to the stress. We need immediate assistance. Sarah leaned forward, her pulse quickening. She knew the co-pilot on that flight, Lieutenant Barnes. He was fresh out of training, with less than 200 hours of total flight time. The idea of him trying to land a fully loaded C-130 in an emergency situation was terrifying. Hercules 401, can the co-pilot maintain control of the aircraft? Johnson asked, his voice shaking slightly. Negative, Tower. Barnes is having a panic attack. He can barely hold the controls steady. We need someone to talk us through this, or we need an emergency landing site. Colonel Harrison burst into the control room, having heard the emergency call from his office below. What's the situation? He demanded. Sir, Hercules 401 has a medical emergency. The pilot is incapacitated, and the co-pilot is unable to function, Sarah reported quickly. Harrison's face went pale. A C-130 with a crew of 5 and a full load of medical supplies was now effectively pilotless, flying somewhere over the German countryside. The nearest suitable runway was their own, but guiding an inexperienced, panicked pilot through an emergency landing would be nearly impossible. Give me Rodriguez on the radio, Harrison ordered. Sir, Rodriguez is unconscious, Sarah said. It's just Barnes up there, and he's not in any condition to fly. Then, what do you suggest? We can't just abandon them. Sarah took a deep breath. She knew her next words would either save lives or end her career. Sir, I know that aircraft inside and out. I have over 500 hours in C-130s. I can guide Barnes through the landing procedures. Absolutely not, Harrison said immediately. Tower personnel don't provide flight instruction to emergency aircraft. We need to contact another C-130 pilot and have them airborne to provide guidance. Sir, with respect, we don't have time for that. Hercules 401 is burning fuel and has an unconscious pilot. Every minute we delay increases the risk. The radio crackled again. Tower, this is Barnes. I can't. I don't know what to do. The aircraft keeps wanting to turn left, and I can't remember the landing procedures. Please help us. The terror in the young pilot's voice was clear to everyone in the room. Harrison ran his hands through his hair, clearly struggling with the decision. Military protocols were clear about chain of command and proper procedures, but sometimes reality demanded flexibility. Mitchell, can you really talk him through this? He asked quietly. Yes, sir. I know that aircraft better than anyone on this base. I've flown it in worse weather and more challenging conditions than what they're facing now. Harrison nodded slowly. Do it. But if anything goes wrong. Understood, sir. Sarah took the radio microphone. Barnes, this is Captain Mitchell in the tower. I need you to listen to my voice and follow my instructions exactly. Can you do that? Captain Mitchell? Yes, ma'am. I can hear you. Good. First, I need you to check your fuel gauge. How much fuel do you have remaining? It shows about 6,000 pounds. Sarah quickly calculated in her head. That gave them roughly 2 hours of flying time, which should be enough for a careful approach and landing. Barnes, you're doing fine. I need you to tell me about the aircraft's behavior. You said it wants to turn left. Yes, ma'am. I have to keep pressure on the right rudder to keep it straight. That indicated a possible trim problem or engine issue. Sarah had experienced similar situations before. Barnes, I want you to check your engine instruments. Are all 4 engines showing normal power settings? There was a pause as Barnes scanned his instruments. Engine number 2 is showing slightly lower power than the others. That's normal for this aircraft. Don't worry about that. Now, I need you to take 3 deep breaths and remember your training. You know how to fly this aircraft. I'm just going to help you organize your thoughts. For the next hour, Sarah carefully guided Barnes through a series of procedures to stabilize the aircraft and prepare for an eventual landing approach. She had him practice gentle turns and altitude changes to build his confidence. Slowly, his voice became steadier and more professional. Captain, I think I'm getting the hang of this, Barnes said. The aircraft is responding much better now. You're doing excellent, Barnes. You're a trained pilot, and you have good instincts. Trust yourself. Colonel Harrison watched Sarah work with growing amazement. Her calm, professional demeanor was exactly what the panicked co-pilot needed. She broke down complex procedures into simple, manageable steps and provided constant encouragement without being condescending. Barnes, we're going to start working on approach procedures now. But first, how is Major Rodriguez? The loadmaster says he's still unconscious, but breathing normally. Might be some kind of medical condition. Understood. The important thing now is getting everyone safely on the ground. Are you ready to begin the approach? Yes, ma'am. I trust you. Sarah smiled for the first time that day. Despite being stuck in the tower instead of flying missions, she was about to use all her skills and experience to save the lives of 5 airmen and preserve a valuable aircraft. It wasn't the kind of flying she had planned to do, but it was exactly the kind of challenge that reminded her why she loved aviation. The next phase would be the most critical. Talking someone through an instrument approach and landing in a C-130 was something very few people could do effectively. But Sarah had spent years mastering every aspect of that aircraft, and now all that knowledge would be put to the ultimate test. Tower, this is Hercules 401. We're ready to begin our approach when you are. Roger, Hercules 401. Let's bring you home. Sarah's hands were steady on the radio microphone, but her heart was racing. She had talked dozens of pilots through difficult procedures before, but never in a situation quite like this. A fully loaded C-130 with an unconscious pilot and a panicked co-pilot was flying in circles over Germany, and she was the only thing standing between the crew and disaster. Barnes, I need you to give me your current altitude and heading, Sarah said into the microphone. We're at 8,000 feet, heading 270 degrees, came the reply. Barnes' voice was much calmer now, but Sarah could still hear the underlying tension. Perfect. Now I want you to turn right to heading 090 and begin a gentle descent to 6,000 feet. Reduce power slightly and let the nose come down naturally. Sarah watched through the tower windows as the distant speck of the C-130 began its turn. Even from miles away, she could visualize exactly what was happening in that cockpit. She had made the same maneuvers hundreds of times in similar conditions. Colonel Harrison stood behind her, along with several other officers who had gathered to monitor the emergency. Word had spread quickly through the base that Captain Mitchell was talking down an aircraft in distress. Many of them had never seen anything like it. Captain, what's your plan for the approach? Harrison asked quietly. Sir, I'm going to set them up for a straight-in approach to runway 08. The wind is light, and it's our longest runway. I'll talk Barnes through a standard instrument approach, but we'll do everything very slowly and deliberately. Do you think he can handle it? Sarah paused before answering. She had been evaluating Barnes' responses carefully, listening not just to his words but to his tone and the confidence in his voice. Sir, he's a trained pilot. His panic was understandable given the circumstances, but his basic skills are sound. The key is keeping him calm and organized. Barnes, how is your descent going? Sarah asked. Good, Captain. I'm at 6,500 feet and still descending. The aircraft feels much more stable now. Excellent. You're doing everything right. Now I want you to level off at 6,000 feet and maintain heading 090. We're going to set you up for the approach to runway 08. As Barnes followed her instructions, Sarah began reviewing the approach charts for their runway. She had memorized these procedures years ago, but in an emergency situation, she wanted to be absolutely certain of every detail. The standard instrument approach required the aircraft to intercept a specific radio beam and follow it down to the runway at a precise angle. Tower, this is Hercules 401. I'm level at 6,000 feet, heading 090. Roger, Barnes. You're doing great. Now I need you to slow your airspeed to 180 knots. Reduce power gradually, and let the aircraft settle into a comfortable approach configuration. Sarah could hear the change in engine noise over the radio as Barnes adjusted the power settings. The C-130 was a forgiving aircraft, but it required a delicate touch during approaches. Too much power, and the aircraft would balloon above the proper glide path. Too little power, and it would sink below the safe approach angle. Captain, I have a question about the landing gear, Barnes said. When should I lower it? Not yet. We'll wait until you're established on the final approach course. For now, just focus on maintaining your altitude and airspeed. Sarah's mind was racing through the approach procedure, anticipating every step that Barnes would need to take. She had to think several moves ahead, preparing him for each phase of the landing process while keeping him focused on his current tasks. Barnes, in about 2 minutes I'm going to have you turn left to heading 060. This will line you up with the approach course for runway 08. Are you ready for that? Yes, ma'am. Heading 060 in 2 minutes. Colonel Harrison leaned over to Sarah. How long have you been flying C-130s? He asked. Since my 3rd year of service, sir. I have over 500 hours in type, including night operations, weather penetration, and tactical approaches. Harrison nodded slowly. He was beginning to understand that Captain Mitchell was far more qualified than he had realized. Her personnel file showed impressive credentials, but watching her handle this emergency demonstrated a level of expertise that went beyond paperwork. Barnes, turn left now to heading 060. Begin your turn and maintain 6,000 feet. Turning left to 060. Sarah could see the C-130 in the distance now, a dark shape against the cloudy sky. The aircraft was following her instructions precisely, maintaining a steady flight path as it maneuvered toward the approach course. Tower, I can see the runway in the distance, Barnes reported. It looks like we're lined up correctly. That's perfect, Barnes. You have good eyes. Now I need you to reduce your altitude to 4,000 feet and slow your airspeed to 160 knots. This is where we begin the actual approach. The approach phase was the most critical part of any landing, but especially in an emergency situation. Sarah had to guide Barnes through a series of precise altitude and airspeed changes while ensuring that he maintained proper alignment with the runway. One mistake could result in the aircraft crashing short of the runway or overshooting and running out of landing distance. I'm descending to 4,000 feet, Barnes reported. Airspeed is coming back to 160 knots. Excellent. Now I want you to configure the aircraft for landing. Lower your flaps to the approach setting and check that your landing gear is ready for extension. Sarah listened as Barnes went through the pre-landing checklist. She could hear him consulting with the loadmaster to ensure that Major Rodriguez was secure and that the cargo was properly tied down for landing. Every detail mattered in a situation like this. Captain, flaps are set for approach. Landing gear is ready for extension. Major Rodriguez is secured in his seat. Perfect. You're doing everything right, Barnes. Now I need you to turn left slightly to heading 055. You're going to intercept the glide slope in about 1 minute. The glide slope was an electronic beam that provided vertical guidance to the runway. Following it precisely would ensure that the aircraft arrived at the correct altitude and position for touchdown. Sarah had flown this approach many times, often in weather conditions much worse than today's clear skies. Barnes, you should be intercepting the glide slope now. I need you to reduce power and begin a descent of approximately 500 feet per minute. I see the glide slope indicator moving. Beginning descent now. Sarah felt a surge of relief as she heard the confidence returning to Barnes' voice. The young pilot was remembering his training and responding well to her guidance. His natural flying skills were taking over from the panic that had initially overwhelmed him. Tower, this is Hercules 401. I think I can see the runway lights clearly now. We're at 3,000 feet and descending. Roger, Barnes. You're on course and on glide path. Everything looks perfect from here. Colonel Harrison had been monitoring radio traffic with the base's emergency response team. Fire trucks and ambulances were positioning themselves along the runway, ready to respond if anything went wrong. The base hospital had been alerted about Major Rodriguez's condition and was preparing to receive him as soon as the aircraft landed. Captain Mitchell, Harrison said quietly, I want you to know that what you're doing here is exceptional. This is exactly the kind of airmanship we need in our service. Sarah nodded, but kept her focus on the radio. She could hear Barnes making small power adjustments as he followed the glide slope down toward the runway. The aircraft was performing perfectly, and his flying was becoming smoother with each passing minute. Barnes, you're at the right altitude to lower your landing gear. Extend your gear now, and make sure you get 3 green lights. Lowering landing gear. I have 3 green lights. Gear is down and locked. Outstanding. Now reduce your airspeed to 140 knots and make your final flap setting. You're about 2 minutes from touchdown. The final approach phase was always the most intense part of any landing. Sarah had to help Barnes judge the aircraft's height above the runway and guide him through the precise power and attitude adjustments needed for a smooth touchdown. She could see the C-130 clearly now, descending steadily toward runway 08. "I can see the runway threshold," Barnes reported. "Altitude is 800 feet and descending." "Perfect, Barnes. You're right on target. Reduce power slightly and let the aircraft settle toward the runway. Don't try to force it down. Let it fly itself onto the runway." Sarah's voice remained calm and encouraging, but inside she was calculating every aspect of the approach. The aircraft's speed was good, its alignment was perfect, and Barnes was following her instructions with precision. Everything was coming together for a successful landing. "Tower, 500 feet, and looking good." "Roger, Barnes. You're doing fantastic. Just hold what you have, and let the aircraft come down naturally." The C-130 continued its steady descent toward the runway. Sarah could see that Barnes had done everything correctly. His approach angle was perfect, his airspeed was stable, and the aircraft was lined up exactly with the centerline of the runway. 200 feet, still looking good. "Perfect, Barnes. Start reducing power gradually. Begin your flare when you're about 50 feet above the runway." The final few seconds of any landing required the most precise control inputs. Sarah had to guide Barnes through the delicate process of transitioning from a descent to level flight just above the runway surface. Too early, and the aircraft would balloon upward. Too late, and it would hit the runway hard. 50 feet, beginning flare. 30 feet. 20 feet. Excellent, Barnes. Now gradually reduce power to idle and hold the aircraft just above the runway. Let it settle gently. The massive C-130 touched down smoothly on runway 08, its main landing gear making contact with a gentle rumble that Sarah could hear even from the tower. Barnes had done it. He had successfully landed a fully loaded transport aircraft under emergency conditions, guided only by radio instructions from the tower. "Tower, this is Hercules 401. We're on the ground and rolling out. Thank you for your assistance." The control room erupted in cheers and applause. Colonel Harrison was grinning broadly, and even the normally stoic air traffic controllers were celebrating. Sarah felt a wave of relief and satisfaction wash over her. She had used every bit of her flying experience and knowledge to help save 5 lives and a valuable aircraft. But as she watched the C-130 taxi toward the terminal, Sarah realized that this experience had changed something fundamental about how others viewed her capabilities as a pilot. She had proven that her skills and knowledge were not just theoretical, but could be applied under the most demanding circumstances. She had demonstrated exactly the kind of expertise and leadership that the Air Force needed in its pilots. The C-130 rolled to a stop on the taxiway, its engines winding down with their characteristic whine. Emergency vehicles surrounded the aircraft immediately, medics rushing aboard to attend to Major Rodriguez, while maintenance crews began checking the aircraft for any mechanical issues that might have contributed to the emergency. Sarah watched from the tower window as Lieutenant Barnes climbed down from the cockpit, his legs visibly shaking from the adrenaline and stress of the emergency landing. Despite his obvious exhaustion, he had performed magnificently under pressure, following her guidance with precision and skill. "Captain Mitchell," Colonel Harrison said, his voice filled with newfound respect, "I need to speak with you privately." They walked to Harrison's office below the control room, where he closed the door and gestured for Sarah to take a seat. His expression was serious, but she could see something different in his eyes. The dismissive attitude that had characterized their earlier interactions was completely gone. "What you did up there was extraordinary," Harrison began. "I've been in the Air Force for 22 years, and I've never seen anything quite like it. You saved 5 lives today, and you did it with a level of professionalism and expertise that I frankly didn't know you possessed." Sarah remained quiet, unsure where this conversation was heading. She had followed proper emergency procedures and used her skills to help fellow airmen in distress. In her mind, it was simply what any qualified pilot would have done in the same situation. "I owe you an apology," Harrison continued. "I've been underutilizing your abilities, and I think I know why. It's not because you lack qualifications or experience. It's because I've been operating under assumptions about what kinds of assignments are appropriate for different pilots. Sir, I appreciate that, but no, let me finish, Harrison interrupted. When I assigned you to tower duty this morning, it was because I thought it was a safe, straightforward assignment. I didn't consider that your flying background might be exactly what we needed in an emergency situation. I treated your skills as less valuable than they actually are. Sarah felt a mix of emotions. Relief that her abilities were finally being recognized, frustration that it had taken an emergency to demonstrate her worth, and hope that this might lead to better opportunities in the future. I've been reviewing your personnel file, Harrison said, pulling out a thick folder from his desk. Your flight evaluations are consistently outstanding. Your safety record is perfect. You have more hours in C-130s than half the pilots in this squadron, and your instructors consistently rated you as exceptional. Yet somehow I've been assigning you to support duties instead of flight operations. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah. She had been relegated to the control tower specifically because she wasn't considered suitable for the important flying missions. Yet it was precisely that assignment that put her in position to save an aircraft and crew when they needed help most. Sir, what happens now? She asked. Now things change, Harrison replied firmly. Starting tomorrow, you're back on the flight schedule. I want you leading the supply mission to Poland next week. And I want you to begin training other pilots on emergency procedures. What you did today needs to become standard knowledge for every pilot on this base. A knock on the door interrupted their conversation. Come in, Harrison called. Lieutenant Barnes entered, still wearing his flight suit, but looking much more composed than he had when he climbed out of the aircraft. Behind him was the base flight surgeon, who had just finished examining Major Rodriguez. Sir, I wanted to thank Captain Mitchell personally, Barnes said. What she did up there saved all our lives. I've never experienced anything like that in my training. How is Major Rodriguez? Harrison asked. The flight surgeon stepped forward. He suffered a cardiac event, probably a heart attack. We've stabilized him, and he's being transferred to the hospital in Frankfurt. He should make a full recovery, but he'll be grounded for several months while he recovers. That means we'll need another pilot for upcoming missions, Harrison noted. Sir, if I may make a suggestion, Barnes said. Captain Mitchell knows more about C-130 operations than anyone I've ever met. Not just the technical stuff, but how to think through problems and stay calm under pressure. She should be leading missions, not sitting in the tower. Sarah was surprised by Barnes' advocacy. He was a junior officer who barely knew her, yet he was willing to speak up on her behalf to a senior colonel. It showed remarkable integrity and courage. I've already reached the same conclusion, Harrison said. Captain Mitchell will be resuming flight duties immediately. Over the next several days, word of the emergency landing spread throughout the base and beyond. Sarah found herself receiving congratulations from pilots, mechanics, and other personnel who had heard about her role in talking down the distressed aircraft. The story grew with each telling, but the core facts remained the same. She had used her expertise to save lives when it mattered most. More importantly, the incident had changed how others viewed her capabilities. Pilots who had previously dismissed her as just another transport pilot began seeking her advice on complex procedures. Maintenance crews started consulting with her about aircraft systems and performance issues. Even the base commander requested a briefing on the emergency procedures she had developed. 2 weeks later, Sarah found herself in the cockpit of a C-130 for the first time in months, preparing for the supply mission to Poland that Colonel Harrison had assigned her to lead. Her crew included Barnes as co-pilot, along with a loadmaster and navigator she had worked with before. Captain, I have to admit I'm a little nervous flying with you, Barnes said with a grin as they ran through their pre-flight checks. Why is that, Lieutenant? Because now I know what you're capable of. If I make any mistakes, you'll probably notice them before I do. Sarah laughed. Don't worry about that. Just fly the aircraft the way you've been trained. That's all any of us can do. The mission to Poland was routine by military standards, but for Sarah it represented something much more significant. She was finally being allowed to do what she did best, command aircraft and lead missions that mattered. The cargo hold was filled with medical supplies and equipment that would save lives at a remote military hospital. As they lifted off from Ramstein and climbed toward their cruising altitude, Sarah felt the familiar satisfaction of being in control of a powerful, complex machine. The C-130 responded to her touch exactly as she expected, and her crew worked together with the seamless coordination that came from proper training and mutual respect. "Navigation looks good, Captain," the navigator reported. "We should arrive in Poland right on schedule." "Roger that. Maintain current heading and altitude." The flight to Poland gave Sarah time to reflect on how dramatically her situation had changed. A few weeks ago, she was being excluded from flying missions because of assumptions about her abilities. Today, she was commanding a critical supply mission and training other pilots in emergency procedures. The change hadn't come about through complaints or appeals to higher authority. Instead, it had happened because circumstances had allowed her to demonstrate her true capabilities. The emergency with Hercules 401 had provided an opportunity to show what she could do, and she had seized that opportunity with both hands. "Captain, we're beginning our descent into Polish airspace," Barnes reported. "Roger. Contact Polish air traffic control and request approach clearance." As they began their approach to the Polish air base, Sarah thought about all the young pilots, both male and female, who were coming up through the ranks behind her. The incident with Hercules 401 had proven that competence and expertise were what really mattered in aviation, not assumptions based on gender or other irrelevant factors. The landing in Poland was smooth and professional, exactly the kind of routine operation that Sarah excelled at. As they taxied to the cargo area and shut down the engines, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Not just because the mission had been successful, but because she was finally being allowed to contribute her skills and experience where they could make the most difference. "Nice flying, Captain," Barnes said as they completed their post-flight checklist. "I learned a lot just watching how you handled the approach in this crosswind." "That's what we're all here for," Sarah replied. "To keep learning and getting better at what we do." As they supervised the unloading of their cargo, Sarah reflected on the lessons from recent weeks. The emergency with Hercules 401 had taught her that opportunities to prove yourself often came unexpectedly, in forms you might not have anticipated. The key was being ready when those moments arrived, having the skills and knowledge necessary to rise to the occasion. More broadly, the experience had reinforced her belief that competence should always be the primary criterion for important assignments. Gender, background, and other factors might influence people's assumptions, but ultimately performance was what mattered most. 6 months later, Sarah was promoted to major and given command of her own squadron. Her first order of business was establishing new training protocols based on the emergency procedures she had developed. Every pilot under her command would learn not just how to fly their aircraft, but how to communicate effectively during emergency situations and how to think clearly under pressure. She also made sure that assignments were based purely on qualifications and performance, without regard to any other factors. The best pilots got the most challenging missions, regardless of their backgrounds or personal characteristics. Lieutenant Barnes, who had continued to fly with Sarah's squadron, was one of the first to benefit from the new training protocols. He developed into an exceptional pilot, known for his calm demeanor and precise flying skills. He often credited Sarah's guidance during the emergency landing as a turning point in his own development. Major Rodriguez returned to flying duty after his recovery and specifically requested assignment to Sarah's squadron. "I want to fly with people who know how to handle emergencies," he said. "After what happened to me, I don't want to take any chances." The story of the emergency landing became part of Air Force training materials, used to teach both air traffic controllers and pilots about effective communication during crisis situations. Sarah was frequently invited to speak at training conferences and professional development seminars, sharing her experiences and the lessons she had learned. But, perhaps most importantly, the incident had changed the culture at Ramstein and other bases where Sarah served. Pilots were evaluated and assigned based on their demonstrated abilities rather than preconceived notions about what they could or couldn't do. The result was a more effective, professional Air Force where talent was recognized and utilized regardless of where it came from. Years later, when Sarah reached the rank of colonel and was commanding her own air base, She would often tell young pilots that opportunities to prove themselves might come in unexpected ways. Stay ready, she would advise them. Know your aircraft, know your procedures, and be prepared to use everything you've learned when it matters most. You never know when the tower might need you to fly.